Chapter 10. The Bone of Contention. Anna Anchak has the distinction of 11 Tashi first ascents in her collection, more than any other canine companion, with the exception, of course, of the ever-aspiring pack leader. She is also the only human ever to spend a night in a tent with Tashi. This was in a public campsite in Ullapool, and it was not an experience she was in any hurry to repeat. I do remember us receiving a rather rousing round of applause from our fellow campers when our small party vacated the site the following morning. Tashi had spent most of the night barking at any noise he heard, so I could hardly blame them. At least his barking ensured we made an early start. The day's objective was to bag the two most westerly Munros of the Fanish range, Sgurr Briac and Achelish. But alas, all two legs made a rudimentary navigation error at the start of the day, and chose to follow an unexpected path rather than his map and compass. The path quickly turned into animal tracks, and then finally ran out amid peat hags on the wrong side of the stream. On closer examination, this stream was no longer crossable without wet feet at best, and in the event of a mishap, total immersion in a torrent of cold water. The already sleep-beguiled party lacked the resolve required for onward pathless progress, so an ignoble retreat was made. Purgatorial ground is, in my experience, almost worse when it is the result of not sticking to a predetermined route plan. We failed to bag our two easy Munros, which would have been new ticks for all of us, and really only my laziness and irritation at a navigation error denied us success. Naturally, I blamed Tashi for our failure. The weather was quite perfect, as I remember, and there was even a breeze to keep the dreaded midges, ticks and clegs at bay. The Western Highlands of Scotland are an insect paradise during the summer months, and the midge swarms hereabout are fearsome and legion in their numbers. A few years back, Anna and I camped beneath the Mullarook Dam to make an early start. When I woke the following morning, I could hear a loud humming coming from outside. It was so loud I assumed it was something to do with the dam hydroelectric works. When we emerged from the tent, black swarm clouds descended on us with ravenous intent, so we ran for the sanctuary of the nearby car, and subsequently imprisoned ourselves with the hordes that followed us in. We were then forced to drive away with all the windows open, to evacuate the vampire insects from the interior. When we returned to our wild camping spot, I discovered I had left the door flaps open to the plague swarm, some of whom had taken up residence inside the tent with our gear. The camp was struck swiftly in a rising panic of misery, and the day's plan to bag two Munros was hastily revised, with hardly a word spoken between us. We just drove off immediately and headed back to Glasgow. Tashi is rarely troubled by midges due to his double coat, but his aversion to spending the night in a tent continued, and around 9 Munros were aborted, mainly due to a sleepless night in ripstop nylon hell with Tashi, and the consequent diminishing resolve on the part of old Mountain Boy to plough upwards at the wholly unreasonable pace set by a youthful Apso in absolutely prime condition. Tashi's performance was never hindered by a lack of sleep, it should be noted. With hindsight, those lost summits would turn out to be far more crucial than my 3 ignoble failures on the notorious inaccessible Pin on Skye. At least 4 of those missed summits were entirely down to my laziness, after an admittedly horrendous night with Tashi, but we were well over halfway on all of those routes, and topping out would not have been a problem for Tashi. The other failures were on what I designated as bad weather hills, and which, ironically enough, we were forced to abort due to exceptionally bad weather. None of those hills cry out to me for a return visit, even if I hadn't first set boot on them with my darling boy. We humans always think there will be another day, but our lifespan is so much longer than that of dogs, an uncomfortable fact that we often choose to ignore. Around 2011, Tashi was diagnosed with epilepsy, and I discovered that I had a potentially serious heart condition. And the carefree days of our spring and summer hills were over, and I would never climb another Munro with Tashi. Unusually, he can take a seizure while exercising, and his welfare has always been more important to me than another tick in that Munro log. Instead, we invented the list of Tashis, and for the last 6 years of his remarkable life, we had a great adventure together, enjoying some of Scotland's lesser hills. The Tashis, as I eponymously named them, are a new and somewhat eclectic mix of entirely random Scottish summits of all shapes and sizes. They are mostly easily accessible and probably physically achievable for almost anybody still breathing. The list of Tashis includes Munros, Corbetts, Grahams, Donalds, Tumps, Humps, and the almost monstrous oddity of a hill that seems to miss out on any list. It has been unkindly stated in some august mountaineering quarters that the Tashis are for old men, dat wee dogs, and family ramblers. And while completing a round of the lesser Tashis is admittedly easily achievable, the round of the greater Tashis is a much sterner challenge, as it annoyingly requires multiple ascents of the same hill rather than just one. Dogged determination will be needed to seek out adverse weather conditions to overcome the boredom of these multiple ascents, and this will undoubtedly be the aim of any self-respecting list-ticking purist. Completing a round of the greater Tashis also requires canine companionship. The Tashis, like any list of mountains, are of course subject to revision in later editions of the tables. However, no summit already on the list will be demoted or diminished in any way. Mind you, there might well be candidates for the list old Two Legs has forgotten about and failed to record. And so it turned out. By then, lists didn't really matter to me much, and my little lion just loved being in the hills, no matter what size they were, or indeed how often he'd done them before. The inaugural meeting of the Scottish Tashis Climbing Club was held in Pertic Library last week. The otherwise excellent event was marred by a rather poor turnout of STCC members, and a major controversy surrounding the keeper of the hallowed list of Tashis. The ever-aspiring pack leader entirely forgot that his autocratic Meister had climbed the Munro Stog Gabar in September 2009, and several other, perhaps lesser hills to boot. Chairperson Tashi was of course outraged by this revelation, and demanded the keeper's immediate resignation. The keeper naturally refused to resign, wrongly believing he was the senior partner in their relationship. Now the APSO can be rather fixated to their own whims and desires, and these will always take precedence over those of their human. Chairman Tashi could not accept such a show of defiance from his human, and belligerently called for an emergency executive meeting of the Scottish Tashis Climbing Club. The meeting was subsequently held in the cupboard annex of Pertic Library in Glasgow. Attendance was poor. Apologies were suitably humble. Matters arising were acrimonious. At the outset of the meeting, The keeper of the hallowed list expressed his concerns that no other STCC members were present, despite there being at least 9 human climbing companions eligible to attend, according to Section 2, Paragraph 9A of the club constitution. The chair responded that while the poor attendance was indeed a cause for considerable regret, it was perhaps auspicious, given the ugly rumours of erratum in the hallowed list that had come to his attention. Had more members been present at this meeting, then undoubtedly it would have been the cause of considerable public humiliation for the chair. The chair then angrily repeated his demand for the immediate resignation of the keeper and suggested David Smith as a more worthy alternative. In a tearful display, the aspiring pack leader took full responsibility for his horrible errors of omission and subsequently made a sycophantically embarrassing plea to retain his position. The chair was assured that the list was now complete and wholly without blemish. The chair then controversially moved that henceforth Bedian Nambian, the crowning point of Glencoe, would have a new subsidiary summit, named after his dear friend Miss Gretna Green, distinguished canine companion, who had sadly passed over the Rainbow Bridge the previous month. The chair proposed that the new top would be given the name Point Gretna in her singular honour, and would be given the status of Munro in the list of Tashies, and perhaps the club secretary should advise the Scottish Mountaineering Council accordingly. The APL queried if Point Gretna was the bungalow-sized boulder that is the last obstacle barring access to the Lost Valley in Glencoe. He went on to state that some incompetents even described its passage as a mild scramble, and alas, this had been the scene of an appallingly public and somewhat humiliating debacle involving Miss Gretna Green's human companion. She had inexplicably become cragfast halfway up the aforesaid boulder, and then refused to move either up or down. The chair angrily confirmed and further commented that he considered the apex of the said boulder was an entirely worthy addition to the list of Munros, and indeed it equally merited inclusion in the table of Tashies. The aspiring pack leader interjected that the apex of said boulder was not the required height to merit the status of Munro, and he doubted the chair had the authority to make such a declaration. Sadly, the chair lost all control of his emotions at this point. Human companions had failed him in the hills on numerous occasions, and he and Miss Green were in the absolute prime of their condition on that particular day. They had already been on their way to the summit, dragging the aspiring pack leader's rucksack behind them, when their further progress was denied them to effect the rescue of a hysterical blonde from New York who shouldn't have been near the mountain in the first place. The aspiring pack leader acknowledged that Meister Tashijomo and Miss Green were indeed dragging his sizable sack towards the Lost Valley when he caught up with them and turned them around, and in his humble estimation there is no doubt that the two were in prime climbing condition and would have undoubtedly reached one if not both of Bedian's Munro summits, and probably well before the APL himself. However, this was all conjecture, and belief in ability does not alter elevation. Gretna's human companion had to be rescued from her plight in the best tradition of their sport, and while Point Gretna could be included in the hallowed list, it will not, and alas, never can be designated as a Munro. At this point the chair lost all self-control and had to be removed from the building, and the meeting was abandoned without resolution of the bone of contention.